Is compassion-focused therapy, or CFT, a third-wave cognitive behavioural therapy? It's commonly included under this category. For example, a 2020 book by Fiona Kennedy and David Pearson titled Integrating CBT and Third-Wave Therapies, Distinctive Features listed CFT along with dialectical behaviour therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy as third-wave therapies. But I don't think it is. Perhaps this is a small or unnecessary distinction. But let me explain why, in my opinion, it's incorrect to see CFT as a third-wave CBT. To begin, let me describe my sense of what is meant by third-wave CBT. The concept of third-wave CBT was coined by Professor Stephen Hayes in his 2004 paper Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, Relational Frame Theory and the Third Wave of Behavioural and Cognitive Therapies in the journal Behaviour Therapy. According to Hayes, the first wave of behavioural therapies was characterised by some of the fundamental aspects of behavioural theory. For example, classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Think Pavlov's dogs from the 1890s, Thorndike's cats from the early 1900s, and Skinner's pigeons from the late 1930s. Actually, have you heard the one about why Pavlov had such lovely hair? He used classical conditioning. Sorry. Actually, all jokes aside, this first wave gave us some fundamental theoretical concepts, and from there some powerful therapeutic techniques, such as exposure-based therapies and behavioural activation. The second wave started to integrate thoughts and beliefs with behavioural therapies, and thus CBT was born. Albert Ellis and Aaron T. Beck are considered to have pioneered cognitive therapy in the 1950s and 1960s, with their incredible work developing CBT approaches to working with debilitating conditions such as depression. CBT and second-wave cognitive strategies such as cognitive restructuring and behavioural experiments have now been used extensively and have a great track record when it comes to being an evidence-based approach to helping people across a range of presenting problems. Third-wave CBT refers to approaches to psychotherapy developed around the turn of this century that further extended CBT by incorporating concepts such as mindfulness, acceptance, psychological flexibility, personal values, and spirituality into those traditional CBT interventions. Third-wave psychotherapies focus on context, processes, and functions of how a person relates to internal experiences. For example, their thoughts, urges, and sensations. Having said that, many of the strategies and interventions used in third-wave CBT also complement CBT strategies such as those I mentioned earlier. A number of psychotherapeutic approaches seem to be considered under the umbrella of third-wave psychotherapies, including dialectical behaviour therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy, but also mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, metacognitive therapy, functional analytic psychotherapy, and others. And there are a lot of good randomized controlled trials now suggesting that these approaches are very helpful for people suffering from a range of psychological and physical conditions, as well as supporting well-being and flourishing. Okay, so what about CFT? Is it part of this third wave or not? Well, let me take you back to a paper Professor Paul Gilbert published in 2002 titled Evolutionary Approaches to Psychopathology and Cognitive Therapy in the Journal of Cognitive Psychotherapy. In this article, Gilbert outlined his evolutionary approach to psychopathology And really, this is at the core of CFT. The theoretical foundation of CFT is a socially contextualized, evolutionary-based, biopsychosocial model of the mind. At the heart of that is the concept that a lot of what happens in our minds is a result of evolutionary adaptations of the human brain and body that were gradually shaped over millions of years to promote survival and reproduction, not happiness, and not really mental health. And so, as part of the CFT model of the mind, we focus on the way our brains work, designed for us by evolution and not designed by us, partly operating through 3 emotion regulation systems called threat, drive and soothing, which detect and respond to threats, opportunities, urges, desires, potential rewards and cues of safeness and belonging. We view our minds as multifaceted. In a 2019 article in the journal Psychology and Psychotherapy, Theory, Research and Practice, titled Psychotherapy for the 21st Century, an integrative, evolutionary, contextual, biopsychosocial approach, Gilbert described the multifaceted mind as housing motives and needs that guide animals to life tasks, emotions that change the physical state of an animal according to the motive being pursued and the local context, and competencies, both physical and cognitive, that enable and guide actions or behaviours. And further to that, humans are a hypersocial species, and so we evolved to send and receive complex social signals that helped us together create social roles and relationships, especially for attachment and care, hierarchy and status, reproduction and cooperation. In CFT, there is a focus on these social mentalities, how our minds navigate our way through the social world. But it's tricky, and the process of evolution creates a bunch of trade-offs in amongst all of this. And while these trade-offs are many and varied, the nub of it is that while our brains and bodies were exquisitely designed for survival and reproduction, these very same aspects of being human can cause us a lot of suffering. And this is useful to know in the case of psychotherapy and working with people to reduce suffering. Given all this, given the evolved nature of the human brain and mind, and that it really is very, very tricky, it's not your fault. It's not my fault, it's not their fault, and it's not your fault. And so we de-blame and de-shame through this insight and understanding of our tricky brains, but also start to explore how to cope with that, manage it, learn, change and grow. We can find and practice ways to take responsibility and manage our own minds. And actually, this is where CBT can come back into it. For example, associative learning principles, such as classical conditioning, mean that when our attachment system is paired with trauma, it can lead to a lot of long-lasting suffering. Or our automatic thoughts, especially negative self-evaluations and self-criticism, seem to result from evolutionarily old threat system activation, especially in and around social threat, getting caught up in loops with newer cognitive competencies, such as self-awareness, self-monitoring, and our sense of our own place, status, or belonging in the group. But CFT is not a third wave CBT. Instead, CFT is much broader. In fact, the key is that CFT integrates a whole range of scientific findings regarding the human experience, and then approaches it somewhat through the evolutionary lens. In the 2019 paper I mentioned above, Gilbert uses the word consilient, which I had to look up in the dictionary. Consilience, the linking together of principles from different disciplines, especially when forming a comprehensive theory. And this is just it. CFT encompasses a comprehensive theory or model of the mind. Evolutionary theory, neuroscience, psychophysiology, and in terms of psychological sciences, CFT draws on attachment theory, clinical and social psychology, cognitive and behavioural theories, psychodynamic and humanistic theories, and beyond, linguistics and language, logic and reasoning, imagery and creativity, theory of mind, empathy and mentalising, the wisdom traditions and spirituality. Well, the list goes on. And out of all of that, CFT then endeavours to tap into the human capacity for care and compassion. Also an evolved aspect of the human mind and our social mentalities. We introduce into therapy the notion of compassion across the three flows of compassion for others, receiving compassion from others, and compassion for the self. And we work towards developing the person's compassionate mind. And then we begin the process of activating the compassionate mind to work with their tricky brains, their motives, emotions, competencies and behaviours, and the various aspects of the mind, not least the multiplicity of anger, anxiety, sadness, shame and trauma, and the many and varied components of all of that, including feelings, thoughts, focus of attention, urges and behaviours, and motives. CFT isn't a third wave CBT, although it is very friendly to approaches such as acceptance and commitment therapy and so on. Instead, it is an integrative, evolutionary-based, biopsychosocial model of the mind that helps us cultivate compassion for others and ourselves in order to approach our suffering, including the dark sides of what it is to be human, and promotes caring connections with ourselves and others to help us flourish.